Dr. Jazz.
Thanks for taking the time, man. Appreciate it.
Problem. Thanks for asking.
I have you on so many records, and back from the Ken Vandermark days to the Streets album, which I want to ask you how I love that one, by the way, when it came out already.
Thank you.
But I want to start like with Semaphore, your latest one, and I think it's the latest one, right? The quartet.
Yeah, I just released a pre-order for a new thing I did with Havard Wiik, the great pianist that lives
really?
pianist. It just put it up as a pre-order. And then there was one with Fred Lomberg-Holm, a duo that I also released. Yeah. And then Semaphore. Semaphore is the latest one with compositions.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
I really love how you compose, the earlier stuff, and just how did you gather this quartet? I mean, I think you guys played together already some time, and how did you compose for this band? I mean, like, what's the idea when you compose actually?
Well, so it's different for different groups, of course, obviously, different musicians. Semaphore, I put that group together. It would not exist without my long connection with Kyle Bruckmann. So Kyle used to live in Chicago, and he was one of the first musicians I started working with in the late 90s, I guess early 2000s. And he had this band Rack, W-R-A-C-K. And I had the first edition of Rack had Jeb Bishop on trombone, and Jen Claire Paulson, who's a lovely viola player that lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and Kurt Johnson, bass player, who I don't even know where he lives now. And it was all Kyle's music. And I love it. He's extremely unique in the absolute best sense of the word. Like, no one writes like him. No one sounds like him. He's doing this music on oboe, which is a crazy instrument.
Yeah.
and electronics. He's really, really, and I learned a lot working with him. So he left Chicago, I think in 2003 or 4. And he had that ensemble. He'd come back to Chicago and we would do Rack, and then I'd go out to San Francisco and we do that band. And then after a few years, it just kind of stopped and dissipated a bit. And he was working more and more with the people out west. But after the pandemic, I wanted to reconnect with him, and I thought it would be nice to have a new band. And so I contacted him. He was into the idea, and I knew Lisa Mezzacappa because she had played with a lot of my friends, and I've seen her in Chicago, and I wanted to do something with her. And Philip Greenleaf, who was somebody that I also just knew more by reputation, and connected with him on online a couple of times during the pandemic. And I pitched it to Kyle. He's like, let's do it. And so really it was a joint effort conceptually, and also Kyle and I both wrote for the group. So I flew out to San Francisco. We rehearsed for a couple of days.
Oh, okay.
The concert, and then recorded. And I think it's really like there's some strong Kyle pieces in there, and there's some of my pieces in there, and I think each piece kind of has its own unique identity in a way. And none of it would have existed without my relationship with Kyle. So that's kind of how that came about.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful how we started already with your drums, man. The first tune, like the beat that you play, like this kind of broken something funky shizzle going on, but it's like, man.
You want to know what Kyle told me? So Kyle, that tune, that first tune is a Kyle tune, right?
Yeah.
And we used to play that with Rack. And he's like, man, can you do something like Deshaun Sorey would do? And I'm like, what, man?
Wow.
But really in a beautiful way. He's like, Deshaun does this amazing thing where it's like broken and it's flowing. And I'm like, yeah. I've been trying to do like the Andrew Surreal version of that my entire life. Like, yeah, I know what you mean, man. So he's like, but do it on the hi-hat. And so that was like a Kyle suggestion. And that's like so it's like, I'm trying to get it moving forward. It's not really in time, of course. It's a little bit broken, but it's also there's patterns, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's It's beautiful. I love the suggestion. I thought it was great, and it was definitely it was a Kyle suggestion for
Yeah,
sure.
it's really cool. I mean, because it starts the record, you know, it's like, man, okay,
There it is. That's the hi-hat.
where are we going with that?
Exactly, right?
Yeah, beautiful, man. Yeah. No, but super. I mean, how do you see yourself as a band leader? I mean, now throughout the years, how in your eyes, I mean, it's hard always to describe that, but if you look at your beginnings and now, how do you see yourself? Have you evolved, and what were the mistakes in the beginning that you made, maybe or not?
Man, I think what I'm learning as I get older as a band leader, it's don't be afraid to let the musicians know what the hell you want.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like be more confident. And it took me a long time. I always felt like I didn't want to like hurt anyone's feelings or step on anyone's toes. But then I look at the situations I was in when I wasn't the leader, and some of the best situations I found myself in were the times where whoever the quote unquote leader of the band
yeah,
had to take me aside and be like, you're not dealing, like you're not doing like I like what you're playing, but the music's gotta, you know, he was very clear. And I learned that clarity is like probably the absolute best thing you can have as a band leader.
yeah.
And I think I'm getting a little bit more confident with that with my ensembles, but it took a long time because I always felt, man, I would be, oh man, I want the music to do this thing, but I was like almost afraid to step on somebody's like ego, you know?
Yeah.
But now I'm just like, no, man, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. No, it's not quite
No,
like
no, I
that,
know,
but
but
I
I know
feel
what you
like
mean. I
maybe
know
I'm
what you mean. I know what you mean.
confident.
Yeah, yeah,
But the beautiful thing is, like, I've had an opportunity to work with so many great people who are also leaders, and
yeah.
so many suggestions get thrown around during rehearsals. You know, piece that I bring in that at times, like, man, should my name even be on this piece because I quote unquote wrote it, but
I know what you
I'm
mean.
getting all these great suggestions from all these wonderful people, and it's changing and evolving. You know, so really for me, clarity. Like I've learned to try to be more clear and more confident in like what I need. And
Mm,
that's something that needs to get developed too, because I've been in
yeah,
situations the band leader didn't know what he wanted. So I'm like, okay, that's cool, I guess, but like you got some pretty great musicians here. Like, what do you want? And that's also cool if you don't know what you want too. I don't know. It just really depends on the situation, I think.
yeah.
But I would definitely say being clear and more confident
Mm.
is definitely a real asset. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but I think I'm moving in the right direction.
Interesting. I mean, you're a drummer, so and as a band leader, and you know, always I played with Tyshawn, and you know,
He's
we did.
great, isn't
Oh
he?
man, it's.
He's so great.
I wrote like 14 tunes that were like that was like 16 years ago or something, right? And like really long 8 pagers, constantly changing rhythms and meters and everything. And we played the first concert, and on the second gig, he doesn't have any lead sheets, you know. And I'm like, hey Ty, are you sure? Yeah, yeah, sure, no worries. I was like, oh
That's
fuck, man, that's
insane.
gonna go wrong, you know. And
No, it won't.
he just sailed through it, like those 9 minutes tunes, like did all this stuff. I was like, man, what?
Yeah, I think that's like a photographic memory
Yeah,
type
yeah,
situation.
yeah,
I definitely don't have that. But that's inspiring, right? That you
yeah,
can
man.
just take that, absorb it, and then have it and just start making music out of it immediately, right?
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but what I meant was like you drummers, you know, like if you have amazing drummers, I never tell them what to play, you know, either Tom Rainey or I played with Gerald Cleaver or whoever these guys are like you give them a lead sheet and it's like when you said the leader doesn't have an idea, you know, in a sense.
Yeah.
Usually I just and you guys come up, you know, including yourself with amazing stuff always. And I'm like, man, you know, how do you do that? How do you interpret the tune usually? Like,
Man, that is, I feel like we can do a series of YouTube videos just on that question.
yeah,
I don't know the answer. You know, when I was first getting into this music, I was reading the Miles Davis autobiography by Quincy Troop,
yeah,
and I remember a passage in there when Miles was like, "Don't mess with the drummer." And I think he said, "Don't fuck with the drummer."
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if this is a family YouTube channel.
No, I think it's not so.
And I think one of the reasons he was a genius is he found the right people to work with and put together. And when he found somebody like Tony Williams or Jack DeJohnette, it's like, this person's gonna have what I need.
Yeah.
Let him do his thing, let him do his thing, and it makes the band's magic. So I think that's a whole school of thought, right?
Yeah, well,
but it changes though. You know what I do sometimes? I've been listening to a lot of Xenakis percussion music.
Yep.
And I put it on headphones and I improvise along to it.
Okay. That's a good, yeah.
And it just kind of sits in my head. And when I go to an ensemble, or I'm playing music with other people, those kind of ideas are just kind of running in my head. And then maybe some of that transfers to the music, how I'm approaching certain music.
That's a cool concept.
And then there are like lots of different examples of bands I'm in where the leader we got Tim Daisy here because we want Tim Daisy, or actually we need a specific thing. And I like both. Like I really like.
Sure.
Earlier we talked about how sometimes leaders don't know what they want, but that's also can be totally fine.
Sure.
If they're like, I want you because you sound this way, or you have these.
Sure.
There's these aesthetics or whatever it is I like about your playing, and then I'm not going to say anything. And then I've been in situations like, don't ever do that again. Because if you do that, what we're doing is we're falling into a 4-bar pattern. You're just playing it over and over. That's something I learned early on. It's like with a few people I've been lucky enough to work with in groove playing. Try not to lock yourself into a 4-measure or 8-measure pattern and loop it.
Yeah.
There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it gets like, it can make the music kind of stagnant in a way.
Yeah.
Static, yeah. So I've learned to like play in pulse, but keep it changing, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I think DeJohnette is like the absolute master at that. You listen to that later Miles stuff at the Fillmore with Jack on drums, and it's in a pulse, but it's like he's just inventing the whole time. It's inspiring. Wow. Yeah. Hey, can I tell you a story about drummers as
oh, please. Yeah.
Composers?
Yeah.
I used to be in this band, The Engines. It was Dave Rempis and Jeb Bishop and Nate McBride.
That's a beautiful group, by the way.
Man, I had so much fun in that band. That was like, we'll get into like why I like bands, bands that stick together. I think they could really get to places that are harder to get to.
I agree. Yeah.
I think you would agree with that. We're playing at Elastic in Chicago, and this guy comes up to Jeb and goes, "Who composes for this band?" And Jeb says, "We all do." And right in front of him, he goes, "Even the drummer?" And I'm sitting there holding my cymbals, and Jeb goes, "Yeah, Tim writes." And he goes, "Huh? How? Wait, I know." He goes, "How? Wait, I know. He sings something to you,
God.
You write it down."
Oh Lord. Wow.
This is happening right in front of me, and I'm holding my cymbals like an asshole. And I didn't know what to do, so I just left. But I think it was like this idea that drummers aren't really musicians and they don't really compose. I'm like, well, sir, I can hand you a list of starting with Paul Motion.
Yeah. DeJohnette you mentioned, and so on and so on.
The list of Gerald Cleveland, people who write in Chicago, Michael Zarang, Hamid.
Exactly.
Just give me a break. But it was hilarious. I'm not going to be harsh. Like I'm stupid too. Like for a lot of things, if someone was going to talk about philosophy, I would be like completely lost. Like,
but you could understand, actually. You could understand
that guy. Where's he from? Albania? I don't know Slavoj Žižek. Is he from North Africa? They're stupid.
Yeah, that's
Slovenia. Is that in North Carolina?
Man, I won't even go there to such. I was once in the States, like I think in Vermont, and like nothing. I love Vermont. There's nothing wrong there, but I love it. but like we were in a B&B and one lady's like, so where are you from? And I'm like, Slovenia. And she's like, what? Torino? What's that? Italy? I was like, well, what do you mean? It's a country. Like, yeah, never heard of it. Like, okay. Former Yugoslavia.
Other than that, the US is a great place, man.
Yeah, no. But you mentioned the engines, and I wanted to ask you, like, and I mentioned, you know, I wrote to you on Facebook, like Streets in Time, that I really love that album. And
thank you.
How did you? I mean, you said you like bands, right? Was that a band? Because I know Hebert lived in New York, and like Swell and Taylor actually also. I guess, like, how did you actually get that group together and that album? I mean, like, since it's quite early in your career.
That was, I think, 2000. What was that? 2010 or 11 or something like this. So I've played with Steve Swell probably more than all the other musicians on that group. I got connected with Steve because he was working in Ken Vandermark's large group, the Resonance Ensemble. And I think Ken hired him. He hired him because he's a great musician.
Sure.
I think Mark Winiarski from Not Two Records suggested, hey, you should ask Steve to do something with you. And this was a long time ago, man, like 07, or I think 07 was the first time we worked.
Well,
so we all met in Krakow at this famous Alchemia club. I don't know if you know Alchemia.
Sure.
Dangerous.
Very
dangerous.
Very dangerous. I think all musicians know now what you mean.
I think so, man. You're like, what do you mean it's 7 a.m. already? Like, what? You mean I gotta go to the train now? I don't even get to go to sleep?
It's like Cerkno, you know, in Slovenia, the jazz festival.
Oh my God, I've had a good time in Cerkno. Wow.
It's always like 5, 6 a.m. and it's like 12 schnapps is too much usually, like in the morning.
Yeah. Man, my schnapps days are behind me, but that's another story. So I was working with Steve in Resonance, and I just connected with him personally as a musician, and the way Ken would work, which he still does with his large groups, which I love, is you rehearse all day, and then there's concerts at night with like small groups. Like they'll take, let's say the ensemble has 10 people, we rehearse the music during the day, take a break, come back and do concerts at night, improvised concerts, freely improvised. And I did a few with Steve, and I was just, this is great. Like, I mean, secondly, I love the trombone. I think it's a fantastic instrument. And so I kind of connected with him, and we always thought about trying to do something. And then I knew Taylor already, even though I didn't play with him. I knew Taylor through some mutual friends. I wanted to do something with trumpet, cornet. Cornet. He's fabulous. Bear, man, Bear is just totally killing. I met him, and I mean killing as a musician and as a person. Like John is like,
oh man, he's the funniest guy ever to tour with.
So funny, and I met him because I subbed. All right, here's another like shaking in my boots moment. I subbed for Gerald Cleaver once on a tour with Gebhard Ullman.
Oh yeah, the Basement Research Project. Yeah,
Basement Research. I think Steve recommended me because we had worked in Resonance, and then Gerald couldn't do a tour, so it was with Hebert, and so I was like, wow, this guy is totally amazing. Like I heard him with Andrew Hill years before in Paris, and I'm like great, and then I'm playing with him. This is incredible. So I wanted to do something with him, so I thought, write some tunes, go to New York, get a band together with Steve and John and Taylor. So we recorded and I released it, and I was thinking it would be more of a band, but you know how things go. Like I live in Chicago, and and so if the band got invited to a festival, that would be a thing. We would do it, and I'm meaning to do more with them, but it just
it's hard. Yeah, sure.
It's gonna be hard, but I love the record. They're playing on it is outstanding, and who knows? Maybe we'll get another chance to do something. Steve and I have been talking about doing something soon anyway, so maybe I'll.
Oh, really? Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, just some kind of new project, and I haven't really thought about what yet, but anyway.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love Steve's playing, man. He's really beautiful record. I mean, even if you listen to it, I mean, it's like 13 years ago, but it still sounds really modern in a sense, you know.
Thank you.
It could have been released last week, and it's still like, wow, okay, that sounds fresh. So
maybe I'll just re-release it and say it's a new thing.
Yeah, just do that.
get a handful of downloads on Bandcamp, and I'll go buy a bottle of wine with it or something.
Yeah, that's speaking of bottles of wine and Bandcamp. I wanted to ask you, obviously we're not getting rich from this making your own records, but like you did Relay Records, your label. I mean, what was your decision based on to do that, and how are you coping with that and doing this? I mean,
I think my first release was in like 2011 or something like that. So it's been a minute. I kind of wanted to have my own label because I wanted to be able to document what I'm doing in a more accurate timeline. Like I've been so fortunate to put stuff on Not2 and Clean Feed and Oka Disc, but it basically takes a year, maybe longer, to have something come out. And there's a lot of problems with where the music business is right now with streaming and everything. Bandcamp is certainly, I think, the best situation we have going for us musicians, because at least we have some control. But the positive thing about what's happening now in music is you can have complete control out of anything you want to release. And so with the Bandcamp platform, or if you want to build a website like Dave Rempis has, which is wonderful, and combine it with Bandcamp, it's just, I don't think we've ever been in a place where we can have as much control as we want. And because of that, I'm like, well, it's obvious. I'll start my own label and I'll just start putting things on there and document what I want. And no one's going to put things out quicker than me with my own stuff. So that was the impetus. That was the impetus. Start making limited edition runs of CDs and digital. Here's what I'm doing in 2021. Here's what I'm doing in 2018. Not here's what I did in 2018. Now it's 2024. You know.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So it's kind of like a timeline, in a sense. These are like photographs or postcards, like what I'm up to at this period of life.
Do you also do that?
So I'm really
printed versions, like CDs of every album you release?
What's that?
Do you do CDs of every
I have
album,
the Relay and then I Relay digital. What's that? I'm sorry, Samo. What's that?
No, that's, I wanted to ask you if you do CDs of every Relay record that you release.
No. So if it just says Relay with a number, like Relay 35, Relay 34, those are CDs. And then if you scroll down, it'll say Relay Digital. Those are just the downloads. Yeah. A lot of like my weird solo music concrete, lo-fi electronic shit is just on digital. Yeah. I've also made one cassette too, because all the kids in Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago, for a minute they were into cassettes, but I found out that they are into cassettes, but just not necessarily my cassettes.
Exactly. No, but cool, super. Yeah, I know what you mean with. I mean, I also have I just did a record now for Clean Feed, which was again recorded 2 years ago. So, but I have my own label as well, just for these purposes, like you say, trying to put out stuff and document it. I mean, that's the only reason.
And I'm going to go disconnected trying to make money from any of this music that I'm doing, because it just puts you in a better space. And the only money I really make is if I go on tour, honestly.
Sure.
If I'm making these records, some people buy them, most people stream them. I'm okay with that. I'm not gonna sit here and think that my records are gonna bring me tons of money or anything like that. I play non-commercial music, so it's
it's our decision.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. The thing I'm happy about is there's things on my label that some people would say are stronger, some people would say weaker, some people like aesthetically different things I do, but I can stand behind everything.
That's important.
My integrity is intact. Maybe you don't like something, but it's honest. It's honest music on there. So that's something that I didn't make that record that record got really popular, but God, I hate it because I don't like how none of my records ever got really popular, but I really I think some of them connected more than others with people, and what more can I ask for than that, so
I agree, definitely. You have a beautiful collection there, like from impro stuff to compose stuff, and it's quite cool what you're doing. I mean, and but I wanted to ask you, we started this talk also with Kyle suggesting you to play like Tyshawn, but when I hear you playing beats, or obviously, you know, many people also associate you with so-called free jazz, which I hate this term, but we need a term. But like, still, you have so much pulse. I mean, you know, funk in your playing and beat, and like, who are your influences regarding playing, or like the two sides, like regarding playing drums, but then also where did this free, you know, playing influence come from? I mean, what was the moment you heard, I don't know, Sonny Murray or someone?
Oh, I understand. Yeah, you know, I grew up in a pretty small town in Illinois. There was about, I don't know, 14 or 15,000 people. So it's about 1 hour north of Chicago. It's right by the Wisconsin border. And I don't know why, but a friend of mine thought, because I was playing rock and punk rock with my brother. My brother's a guitar player, and I was into like, you know, Minor Threat and Sabbath. I loved Black Sabbath. I still love Black Sabbath.
Yeah, there.
Sometimes washing the dishes, I put on Black Sabbath. Like, this is so good, man.
War Pigs and that stuff. I love that.
Oh my God. You know, especially with what's going on in the world. Now, I think after Putin invaded Ukraine, I put on War Pigs. Like, I'm just like, yes. Oh, you know, I was just like, what's going on?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
So I guess because I was in the music and no one in my family likes jazz except me. My wife sometimes, but not always. And
I hear
a
you.
friend of mine was like, you know, Tim, you love this intense music. You should check out this John Coltrane record. And I heard of Coltrane, like, you know, I wasn't that cut off, but it was Giant Steps. And what got me was Art Taylor's Ride Cymbal. I was like, that's amazing. How does he fucking do that? Because it was like, and I'm gonna sound a lot cooler than I actually am, because this is like you can rewrite your own history as you get older, right?
Sure.
It's got the same intensity as a Minor Threat record, except he's doing it at lower volume. That's like the cool, elegant way of putting it, right? Back then I didn't, you know, but it does.
Yeah, sure.
It's amazing. The music was beautiful and raw and intense. And so I'm like, what is this? And then I got involved in Miles. So the Coltrane plays with Miles. And the first Miles record I got was Bitches Brew.
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
this is so different, right? But still a pulse. And then I got In a Silent Way, which still remains probably one of my favorite records of all time. Still a pulse, which is a hi-hat, you know, for most of it. Amazing. And then the cooking, working, steaming, like I got that. It's kind of like my first collection. So late Miles, early Miles, and this Coltrane record. And somebody got me Interstellar Space, but I didn't, there was no context. I'm like, I don't understand it. Not that I understand the other shit. Not that I understand anything, but at least Giant Steps had, like, you know, a pulse
or something. Yeah.
Like, change it. Yeah, right. And even Bitches Brew, there's a lot of grooves. But I like, so I'd like put it on the shelf and never listen to Interstellar Space. And then I moved to Chicago in the 90s. And I went to this club called the Velvet Lounge, which was Fred Anderson's club. And he was playing with Hamid. I mean, this is how lucky I was. The first free thing I saw was Peter Kowald, Hamid, and Fred Anderson.
Oh man, are you kidding me? Wow.
No, that was the first like free. And I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, it was everything. It was the communication. They weren't playing tunes. They weren't playing over changes, but it was beautiful and felt great and was working. I was like, now this is cool. How are they doing that? Like, and that's kind of was my like, oh, and then through Hamid, like I looked at records he was on, and I picked up this record Birdhouse with Jim Baker and Harrison Bankhead and Fred. It was just an Oka record, which is just tremendous. And then it kind of spiraled from there. I met Dave Rempis shortly after that, and we started getting together, and I started listening. I pulled that Interstellar Space record out.
Okay.
And I got really into Rashid. Rashid was like the first quote unquote freer drummer that I really like connected with. And I started listening to a lot of stuff with Rashid on it, Sonny Murray. And then it goes. But you know, at the same time, I was never like, now I'm only into free, because I was also going to sessions trying to play bebop. You know, I kind of sucked and I would never call myself a bop drummer. I love the language, and I still practice. Like I practice Alan Dawson in my basement. Like I
Oh man, yeah.
practice. Yeah, I do. And I don't play that way, but it gives me some kind of like beautiful foundation to kind of like work with when I'm improvising. And then it just spiraled. Like I heard Avril Ross shortly after that. Chad Taylor was still living in Chicago. I heard him with Robin Zurich. I'm like, oh my God. Like Chicago goes through cycles like any city, but man, the late 90s.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
It was crazy because you had all that stuff going on, like all of Vandermark stuff. You had Rob's, all that stuff. But then you had like people like Jim O'Rourke were still here.
Yeah.
And he was asking all these people to play on his record. So you can put on Jim O'Rourke record, and you can hear Jeb Bishop on it, you can hear Ken on it, you hear Rob on it. Stereo Lab was asking these people to like, it was just a tremendous time to be in this city. Like, wow. Like I never went to school. Like I went to a community college, which is just like a 2-year college. And I moved to Chicago because I was going to stay here for a year and then go back to school. And I stayed here for 23 years.
Wow.
Because what am I going to learn in a classroom that I can't learn from listening to Joe McPhee and Hamid Drake? Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ. Like,
Sure.
and I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was what teacher of mine it was, told me, dude, don't go back to school. You've got this community. If you're going to go to school for business or accounting. Because I didn't even know what I want. I'm going to go to school for, I don't even know. I'm like, no, you're going to go back to school, learn how to run a business and just do your thing because, you know, you're okay. You're not amazing. You're not shitty. You're pretty okay. And what helped me out is I had a good open attitude. That really helped me, man, because I would show up shit all over the place. People would be like, Daisy, man, work on your time. I'm like, what's that? Like, and so I started playing the Jimmy Cobb records, like, all right. And then I had some great teachers. Like I took a lot of private lessons with different people, and that really helped me out big time. But and the search content, I mean, I go through, you're probably the same way, Samo. I go through cycles. Like I've been listening to a lot of just Xenakis percussion music now.
Yeah.
Because I love it. And I would never try to like pull out a score and play it, but I just like having it in my head.
Yeah.
And it kind of informs the improvising.
But it's important what you said, like that you didn't go through school, because you know, not to criticize the school system. I mean, I have my music school as a guitar teacher in Marburg here, and I love teaching, but like many times, you know, because it's a mass system, like when I listen to guitarists or drummers, like, you know, they sound amazing, but they all sound like a new generation coming up, like, you know, in New York, Nasheed Waits or, you know, or like amazing players. And then, you know, I led a workshop last year, and there was one drummer who finished like in university, and he was like, yeah, I really like Jeff Ballard and Nasheed Waits. I was like, wow, cool, man. What about, you know, have you checked out Paul Motion and, you know, Sonny Murray? And he was like, no, who are these? I was like, man, are you
the failure of the education system right there.
Yeah, you cannot start with those guys who I love, Jeff and Nasheed, of course, but like, you know, go where they went, you know, and it's like what you do and we do who are self-taught. I mean, it's a different discovery, and I think that's beautiful. So
I have one student right now who's having this kind of philosophical crisis, I guess you'd call it, because he's at the point where he's ready to kind of find his own thing, but he doesn't know how to get there. And I'm like, you can listen to, like, he loves Max Roach, and I'm like, well, listen to Ed Blackwell too, listen to Jerry Hemingway, listen to Paul Motion, listen to Bob Moses, Rock Alam, listen to Chad Taylor, listen to and listen to bass players, and listen to guitar players and horn players, and go to the art museum and go to the desert and like find out who you are. And I told him, you got to find out who you are, man.
Yeah.
Because you can't just transcribe Max Roach solos and play them verbatim. If you want to do that for the rest of your life, that's cool. Like, but if you want to go out and play, you have to figure out your shit. And that's the hardest thing to do. Billy Hart sounds like Billy Hart.
Yeah.
Andrew Cyril sounds like Andrew Cyril. Jimmy Cobb sounds like Jimmy Cobb. Chad sounds like Chad.
Yeah.
And it's fucking hard, but And he's like, oh, how do I do that? I'm like, I can't answer that question.
And also start
So in a
doing it,
way,
right?
I mean, you can't, in one way, you can't fault the education system because there are certain things you just can't teach people. You can't teach someone to be curious, right? You
Yeah.
got to be curious. Some people are lucky enough to have like families that are really encouraging.
Mm.
Some people are lucky enough to have families that aren't encouraging. And what I mean by that is you push against something, right? My parents don't want me to do music, so I'm gonna fucking do music 1,000%.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I was so lucky because the Empty Bottle, do you know that
Yeah.
club
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
Chicago?
Yeah.
So before, when I first got here, Tuesday nights were the Vandermark Five before I was in that band, and I was studying with Tim Mulvaney, who was the drummer in that band. I was taking lessons from him. And then so every Tuesday I can go hear them. And then Wednesdays was John Corbett and Ken were booking a series. And man, I heard Han Bennett, I heard Paul Lovens, I heard Paul Litton,
Mm.
Brotzmann Tentet, I
Yeah,
heard Nice Shit with Brotzmann, like which is like I didn't realize that was kind of like maybe an uncommon instrumentation. I mean, it was burning, but you wouldn't think Brotzmann and Nice Sheet right away, right? Corbett put that together. And it was, of course, it was killing because Nice Sheet is like, I mean,
crazy,
holy shit. And then I heard all these other great Dutch musicians like Bars and Walter Weerbos, and that was my school, man.
Yeah.
That was my school. And you know what helped me out? Like someone was like, don't when you go up to these great musicians, don't be an asshole. Like, don't go up and bug the shit out of them. Learn to be cool. And that is a huge lesson because between you and me and YouTube, there are some musicians I know who are so burning, but the hang is just, man, just stop complaining about or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know exactly.
You know, they just don't, man, can you just have a glass of white wine? My beverage of choice. Have a glass of white wine and just chill. You're here, like you're doing it. You're like, you're at the brain. You're in Circo. What else do you fucking need? Like,
exactly.
There's so much of it, man. Like, there should be a class at school called like being cool around other people.
That should be the subject at university, right? This and music business. Yeah.
Just being chill around other people, man.
Yeah.
Because if you're gonna pick people's brains and just ask tons of questions, then what you need to do is set up a lesson with somebody.
Yeah, definitely. Just jump in. You mentioned Ken before, Vandermark, and you know that's the first time when I heard you actually, like you know those Airport for Light records and that early 2000 stuff. And how did you enter that band? I mean, I know you said you studied with Tim and Little, but like you know, playing with Ken, who has been a feature in Chicago for such a long time.
I met Dave Rempis earlier. I met him. Dave Rempis was one of the first musicians I met when I moved to Chicago. He was a bartender at a place called the Bop Shop, this old jazz club. And I had to go to the jam session, and the drummer on the jam session was Robert Berry.
I don't know.
Played Sun Ra.
Okay.
Yeah, he was an amazing cat, man. Wow. But because I met Dave, him and I would get together. When I met Dave, him and I discovered we had similar interests in music, and we just started playing all the time. And he, shortly after I met him, joined the Vandermark Five. So I would go on Tuesdays to hear them, like I mentioned earlier, and Dave was playing with them. And basically, I think it was about 2 years after that, Mulvaney decided to step down from the band, and I guess Dave suggested it because I've met Ken a few times because I would go out to hear the concerts, trying to be cool and not bug him too much, you know. I took the class on being cool, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And he asked me to join after Tim stepped down. And so that's how I started. And I think my first gig with them was in like December 2001, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And we went on tour. I think my first gig with them was at the Empty Bottle. We did a few Tuesdays, and then I went to Europe for the first time with that band.
How was that like? I
It
mean,
was crazy. It was the
Ken
North
has
Sea
like 6 month
Festival.
tours or something. I'm kidding, but like seriously.
That came later. That came later. This was a festival, but it was North Sea, and I didn't know anything about anything. And I don't know if you've ever been to the North Sea
Yeah,
Jazz
yeah, yeah.
Festival.
It's
It's
crazy.
insane.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is what Europe is like? Okay. Like, no, this is what the North Sea Jazz Festival is. It's like huge, lots of stages, and it was exciting, you know. It was like, whoa, Jim Black. Oh my God, like I'm fucking scared now. Like all these great musicians, you know. And uh that was my first gig in Europe. Was at the festival was in The Hague, and that's where I played in Europe for the first time. And then we started touring more after that. We'd go to Europe once or twice a year. And then we had our famous residency at Alchemia in Krakow. And that's where that big 12 CD box set came from.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah, so that's when it started. And then touring with him and working with Ken, which has been great. He asked me like to do other offshoot bands.
Yeah.
He would put different groups together. I think you heard me with Made to Break.
Yeah,
And,
in Maribor actually.
yeah. So and I'd been working steady with him in different projects up until I had my first child, which was in 2016. Then I told him, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back just because I don't want to be a dad that's gone.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah.
How's he like as a band leader? Speaking of band leading.
Well, we talked earlier about clarity and confidence.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned a lot of that from him. Like I don't always agree with suggestions he throws at me. But I listen to everything, and he's very clear about what he's looking for, and also open to suggestions, of course. But yeah, it's great. I learned that was a very important lesson about being confident and clear. And the other really important lesson I learned from Ken is you show up to play, no matter who's in the audience, no matter how many people are in the audience.
Yeah, and
that's inspiring because a lot of people think, well, he's playing these festivals and it's always full of people. And no. I was on a tour with them where one gig was like, we were in Ukraine.
Wow, man.
Playing for like 600 people in Lviv. And then the next gig was in the city in West Germany, and there was 4 people. One of them was the door guy. One of them was the chef at the restaurant in the club, and they can give a
I know
shit.
that. Yeah.
And the odd thing was the gig in Germany paid more money. So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
And you play like it, and you show up to play, and that's huge. Reminds me of a funny Derek Bailey quote where Derek Bailey says, I play my ass off whether I'm playing in front of 4 people or 6.
That's a good one, actually.
Isn't that great?
That's fantastic, actually.
And that is so true, because I heard a story of actually I think you interviewed Chad Taylor, right?
Yeah.
Did you say he was doing a gig in New York where they were going to play So What? And the only person in the audience was Jimmy Cobb, but he didn't know it was Jimmy Cobb when you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like just you play, and that was a really important lesson. Really important lesson. Just show up to play. You're tired, you're hungry, maybe there's no one in the audience. Just play. Because that really then if you're not there to play, then you got to ask yourself why you're even doing this, because it's like it doesn't pay anything and you're always tired and like what I mean, if you love traveling, that's cool, but you
pay to travel, right?
Yeah,
Tim Burns
exactly.
said that.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool.
Which is true.
Yeah.
It's funny, this touring experience is like, I remember like years ago when I started into jazz, like I went to see Pat Metheny group, right, in the early mid 90s, and their tour schedule was like, wow, man, I would love to do that. And then you start doing this on your own, you're like, shit, this is not really so easy, like 14 days, like traveling 6 hours, or playing gigs, and it's heavy business.
What's the longest stretch you've ever done?
Last year I had a tour with Bob Moses and Ariel Anderson, and we did 17 gigs in 18 days, which was for me, I died in the end. I was like, I thought I suck my playing. I thought like I sound the same every evening, like and stuff like that. I had such problems.
That is amazing. That is, and I never got farther. This is kind of let me find out an elegant way to put it, but with all the different situations I've been in, I've never been more feel like I'm pushing the music farther than being on tour with one ensemble for a long period of time.
Yeah. Yep.
Whether it's with compositions or free, because I toured with Rempis a lot. I probably toured with him more than anybody. And we did a tour where we had 12 or 13 concerts. And by like halfway through the tour, you're like, it's not automatic, but it's just like you're just playing and you're in it already. And it's so nice. But then the trick is when you are in it, gig 7, gig 8, how do you stop repeating yourself? So then you get to that. You get to a new set of
problems. I mean, sometimes do you have that, or how do you solve that? If
sometimes, well, here's it. Paul Litton put it so elegantly once. He said he has a certain set of muscles for the Evan Parker trio. You know, it's super interesting, and I feel like playing with Dave. I have a certain set of muscles. I get into like my fake Rashid stuff, and I'm trying to break away from it. And one thing Dave and I have done in the last couple of years is trying to invite a guest to play with us to try to knock things around. So we made that record with Mark Feldman, and that came out of like inviting him on a gig, and we're like, this is great because it really knocks us around because it's a violin. So Daisy, let's think about dynamics, and Rempis, let's think about dynamics. And not that Mark can't play loud; he can do anything, but it made us rethink. We can't just go. I can't go to my standbys, you know, and that was a challenge. It was. I feel like we are creating some new stuff, but night after night after night, we find ourselves getting into like certain similar territories, which is nothing wrong with that. But what I'm interested in is trying to like not reinvent. We'll come up with new ideas.
I know what you mean.
I do this, you know, and but you can't get to that space unless you're in. I feel like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 gigs, and you're like, wow, you know, but then the fatigue sets in, right?
Yeah, man. It's and also I did a tour years ago with Tony Malaby, right? And we played the first gig, and it's awesome. We play my tunes, and you know, kind of like written out stuff, and we go into free zone. And amazing first gig, and second gig, we play one tune, and you know, I kind of loved the vibe where we went on that tune, the first gig, and I go again there now, and Malaby's like, of course, he's not even joining me. I was like, what, you know, what's, and and then I asked him, and he was like, well, no, I mean, come on, it's not a pop band, you know, it's like, and I was
like, exactly. That was I've made that. Maybe mistake is not the right word.
I mean, like
try to recreate the second gig, what you did on the first. And when you played the first gig, you weren't thinking about recreating the airplane ride that you were on or whatever happened.
Exactly.
You know, it's hard because what I've learned is if I go into it with try to go into each concert with a blank slate, so to speak, it helps the best. It's not always successful, but if I go on, especially in a totally free situation, just go in and just start playing and don't think too much. Usually I end up getting more into those places. You know, keep things fresh, you know. But it's challenging. It's a beautiful challenge.
Heavy, man. It's a beautiful challenge. That's nicely put.
I did the longest I ever did was not 8 weeks, I think, but it was with 3 different bands, one after one after one. And I was like, this is enough for me. Like, I don't need to be gone this long.
Man, that's heavy. 8 weeks.
But it was Gebhardt's Basement Research. No, it was my own quartet. I had a band for a minute called the New Fracture Quartet that was put out on Multiculti, the label from Poznan. And it was Nate Woolley and me and this guitar player from Chicago, Dave Miller, and bass player from Chicago. It was Nate McBride on the record. But he couldn't do the tour, so this bass player, Jake Finsel, did it. Great Chicago bass player. And we did, I think, 5 or 6 nights all in Poland. And then Basement Research after that. Gebhardt set up a tour with like 9, 8 or, it was nice. And then Residence Ensemble with Ken after that. Or I think we went to Lviv and Zaporozhye, Ukraine. Like, wow.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, this is great. I love doing this. This is what I want to do. I think 3 to 4 weeks is as much as I want to be away from home.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. It's heavy. It's not as easy. It's like, you know, you look at schedules of like Matini or someone, and he's like 200 days playing or 250, and I'm like, shit, man. Gee, you know.
You know what needs to get invented, man? There needs to be like a cultural pass that gets you through airport security and onto the airplane really quickly.
Yeah.
Because that's where so much of the shit that's like, I love the playing. I love flying and traveling. I hate dealing with airports. And that sounds like a first world problem, and it is. But if you're playing 200 nights a year, and maybe Pat doesn't have to worry about that. Like different people travel different ways, like, you know, but that's where all the crap, that's what makes it kind of challenging. It's not, I mean, the music has its own challenges, but it's like waiting in a security line, you know, like, oh God.
Yeah,
you know?
heavy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We flew from Barcelona to we were in Barcelona with Made the Break, and we were going to Ulm in Germany.
Yeah, okay. Oh man, that's a long way. Okay.
Yeah, and we had to fly, I think the closest big airport to Ulm, it might be Stuttgart. I don't know. I have to look at
probably, yeah.
Or so we land in Barcelona. We're like, why are we leaving Barcelona? This is like the best place in the world. And we go and we get pulled out of line at the airport in Germany because we look like a bunch of musicians, and we are. And this police officer is just like, he's taking this weird paper and swabbing our foreheads with this paper and putting it in the machine to see if we have drug residue coming out of our pores.
Oh my Lord, are you kidding me?
It's like, I need to write a book, man. This is the kind of stuff that happens on tour. The contrasts. You're like, one day you're on like the Ramblas, like eating food and drinking amazing Spanish wine, and then you're like in a security room at an airport in Stuttgart while some like fat German dude with a mustache is swabbing your forehead and asking you about what kind of drugs you took. Like, this is
bizarre, right? Yeah.
Oh, and another thing that happened in Barcelona, this woman came up to Christoph Kurtzman and was like, "Are you guys in a band?" He's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Are you famous?" And he's like, "Well, if you like certain kinds of like avant-garde electroacoustic music," I'm paraphrasing a bit, like maybe some people know who we are, but we're not, you know. And she goes, "Well, where are you going?" And he goes, "Oh, we're going to Ulm." And she goes, "If you're famous, why are you going to Ulm?"
That's a good one, actually.
Good question.
That's a good question. Legit. Yeah.
But I love it, man. Like I thrive, like I love these weird situations you end up finding yourself in, because unless you've done it, unless you've toured, you can't really describe what happens. Like, you know,
it's but then there's, you know, you're tired and stuff, and the music, let's say it works, but then there are like those small
hold on, you're
moments.
breaking up a little bit. Let's see. Hold up. Uh-oh. Frozen. You're frozen.
Oh shit, really?
Oh, hold on. Now you're better. You're back, I think. You were frozen for a second.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Now I'm just saying, like, these small moments then really count. Like, you know, have a nice gelato somewhere in afternoon and or a beer, and you're like, oh man, okay, it's cool. I'm back again, and you know, it's beautiful. But
you know what I tell some of my students who or friends who've never toured, I tell them to read Forces in Motion, that book on Braxton by Graham Locke, because those road stories in there are like, this will give you a little taste of what it's like, man. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Tim, I know you have a lesson afterwards, but I just wanted to ask you, you know, you mentioned Mark Feldman before, and I know he came to Chicago, and I think that's quite a huge addition to you guys. And, you know, you did a record with Fred Longberg-Holm, those improvised records. How do you usually approach the improvised? You said, you know, come with a blank slate kind of idea, but like still like improvised concert, how do you get into it? And
well, it depends on the person, right? I mean, I played with Fred a lot in different contexts, so we have this vocab that we know each other's playings a bit, but then again, just like today, we're trying to break free of it. The thing for me about recording it is, if it can't be a live concert, I try to make it feel as much like a live concert as possible. Because for me, it's really hard, challenging to play freely improvised music in a recording studio.
Yeah.
Because I don't have anyone to bounce ideas, like energy off of. Like again, even if it's 5 or 6 or 7 people in the audience, you feel like you're presenting and you get this exchange, this flow. So there's a club in Chicago called Elastic Arts, and I often do a lot of recordings there during the day, because I'll bring an outside engineer in, because it's still a club and it feels like that. Even if there's not an audience, it still kind of feels a little bit like you can breathe a little bit. So for me, a lot of it is that, the context. And then when we start playing again, I don't, if it's at all really improvised thing, I'm again trying not to think about anything. Now it's different with psychologically with someone like Fred, and then when I first started Mark, because I didn't know Mark, only reputation. And so it's like, oh, I'm playing with Mark Feldman. So, and as much as you would think that shit you wouldn't think and care about that, of course you do. You're like, holy shit, like. But now I play with him a bunch of times, so it's like, oh, it's Mark. Yeah, cool, whatever.
Yeah.
Not whatever, but I'm not.
No, I don't know what you mean.
Yeah. So it really is the context, man. It really is more than like, it's just trying not to overthink, and like putting myself in situations where it would be the most easy is not the right word, where I can create in a context that is the most accessible to me, which for me is live concert number one. If it can't be a live concert, something close to a live concert, which is recording in a club.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm doing a thing after my vacation with it's called Vox 4, and it's Fred Lombrick-Holm, James Falzone on clarinet, and I'm using Gabby Fluke-Mogul, the violinist in New York, and I'm writing for that.
Oh wow, beautiful.
And yeah, kind of chamberish music, and we're gonna rehearse at my house, but then the next day we're gonna rehearse and record all day at Elastic, and then we're gonna also record the concert.
Beautiful.
And I found this to be a really good way to do a project that's not going to do a bunch of concerts in a row, because the full day of recording the music during the day and then taking 2 hours off, and then when you hit the concert, you're kind of pretty warm. You're warm on the tunes, but also it's a little different because there's an audience, hopefully.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And I did that with a few of my records. A couple of my records is like, I used to do something always on my birthday. I would do a live concert. And rehearse all day, take a break, and then record the concert. And I always end up using the live concert, because the live concert always has, even if some of the music didn't get executed quote unquote perfectly, there's always a vibe, there's always a beautiful vibe to the live thing that it's hard to get when you're not performing in front of people.
Definitely. To give you some space in between the teaching, just to end, like what's on the schedule for you still this year, like in the fall or stuff? Are you coming to Europe also, by the way? I mean, or like,
I'm coming to Europe 2 more times.
Oh man, we should hook up. Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm going to Switzerland in September. There's a young saxophone player named Sebastian Strinning. He lives in Lucerne. He's probably, I would think, early 30s. And he's burning, man. He's great. And he was in Chicago last year, and we made a record in my basement. Brought an engineer in my house, and we loved it. We thought it was great. We're like, this is cool. This sounds great. Let's put it out. So there's label Vito Exchange, which is a label based in Switzerland, and I think it's based in Lucerne. They're going to release a record in next month. And so we set up a short tour. I think we're going to Biel and Zurich and Lucerne, and then we're going to play in Munich.
Fantastic.
And then I'm going to fly home because I'm dumb. I didn't look closely enough at the calendar. I'm flying home for 2 or 3 days and flying back. But in hindsight, it's good I'm going home because I need to see my kids. But I'm going back for 2 weeks, and I'll be all in France with do you know the bridge? Do you know that project, the bridge? It's Alexandra, he lives in Paris, and he has this project that does Chicago, France, kind of like connections, basically. Yeah. It's pretty cool. And so it's always a mix of Chicago and French. And we'll do a bunch of gigs in the States, and then 2 years later the same ensemble will go over to Europe.
Oh,
And
wow,
it was a
beautiful.
group. Yeah, it was a group that's supposed to be with Jamie Branch. She was in the Chicago version, but that's not happening now, obviously. So I'm coming over, and there's a saxophone player named Molly Jones that lives in Chicago who's great. And her and I will be the Chicago musicians. And then there's some French musicians playing with this. And we've got a nice, like 10 concerts or something like this in
Wow,
France.
in France. Wow, beautiful, man.
All
Okay.
in France. Yeah, all in
Yeah.
France. And then I go home. I don't have anything else in Europe for this year. So,
Fantastic.
but
Beautiful.
I'm gonna try to bug Bogdan and get back over to Ljubljana because that is, playing or not playing, one of my favorite cities in the world. So we should meet me by the river in Ljubljana, okay? And we could have a coffee and
Yes,
just like that would be nice.
that would be nice. Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Great.
totally.
Cool, Tim. I won't bug you anymore, so speaking of bugging, but thanks for
Bug you.
sharing some of these thoughts, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you, man. It's really great to talk to you. I watched your Robin Zurich interview, which was wonderful. And I watched your Rockalam interview, which was wonderful. And you did one with Chad too, Taylor.
Yeah.
Great. And I listened to that one. So keep it up, man. This is fantastic, man. Super
Thank you.
valuable.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Hey, laku noc, do widzenia. We'll see you soon, man.
Bye, man. Cool. Ciao. Ciao.